she's perfect on time too. 15 minutes on the dot. So we're going to continue along the theme of just challenges and concerns that's potentially unique to this industry. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? A little bit higher?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just do a little bit of background on myself. My name's Manny Flores. I work for a company called Imperial Protective Service. I'm responsible for strategy and development. My background is strategy consulting, management consulting. So I spent the sort of first 15 years of my career focused on helping other companies perform better. So I had an opportunity to join my father's business, which is a security business, and then we're now supporting the cannabis industry, and I'm trying to apply a lot of those same methods to my business now, and then hopefully you guys can learn from that as well. So I'm going to ask you guys, what do you think the biggest challenges that you're facing as business owners or operators within the cannabis industry? Just yell it out.
Cash.
Cash?
Yeah.
Getting in.
What was that?
Just getting into it, knowing people.
Okay, getting into the industry.
Licensing.
Licensing. Anyone else want to yell something out? Okay, so the good news is all of this is on my next slide. One of the biggest challenges is growth. This industry 2 years ago was a $4.2 or $4.4 billion industry. Any idea where it's going to end today, or at the end of this year? Estimates?
7 billion.
Almost 8 billion, just shy of 8 billion. How about 4 years from now, 2020?
20 billion.
20 billion, 22 billion, actually, I think. So this industry is growing fast, and anytime you have rapid growth like this, you're bound to run into a number of different challenges to face. 50% of the states have now legalized medicinal use for cannabis. There are about 4 or 5 states that have recreational. I think there are about 4 or 5 states that have it as ballot initiatives this year, so it continues to grow. There's the revenue numbers I walked you through, so it was 22 billion. And there's a lot of, whenever there's a challenge that you face, there's usually an opportunity associated with it. Colorado is kind of like, I think, the case study that a lot of states look to. They've managed to really, from a job growth perspective and a tax growth perspective, it's been a great industry for the state of Colorado. I think last year they issued 21,000 occupational licenses. But when you grow rapidly, there's also growing pains to just sort of be mindful of. So I'm going to go through a couple of those, but it's a smart audience. You guys all sort of yelled out some of the stuff on the slide. So changing regulations and new regulations. It's very difficult to keep up with all of the changes. Some markets have very little regulations, and some you might argue are overregulated. Staffing issues, which Anna very nicely and succinctly zeroed in on. Physician knowledge. Believe it or not, when the industry growing as rapidly as it has, there are a lot of physicians out there that don't feel that they're qualified or have the qualifications to actually prescribe. There's still the Schedule I classification. I think the young lady in the front here talked about cash being an issue. Only 3% of banks in the country actually support the cannabis industry. That makes raising capital, that makes depositing money. I mean, there's a lot of challenges.
Traditional small business loans, a host of things that aren't now available to these small businesses. Nice work, Manny.
Thank you. And then there's the tax code. I mean, you get taxed on gross versus net. You can't necessarily take deductions for losses that you might do in other industries. Security challenges. So the area that I'm probably going to focus on a little bit more here. Robberies are common. And law enforcement in the communities that you operate in aren't always as sympathetic as you might think they should be or need to be. But when I was looking at doing some research for this presentation, there was a correlation between these two items, security and staffing. And so I'm going to talk about how important it is to hire good people, good strong background checks. 90% of product losses and asset losses or financial losses that come from this industry happen from inside forces, and that's sourced from marijuana ventures. That's a pretty significant percentage if you think about it.
Wow.
The business impact of that is estimated at about 3% of revenue. So 3% of every dollar that you make is probably going to people that work for you, that are taking from you. Now you might think to yourself, 3%, that's a manageable number. That's not a huge number. But when you start to put that into perspective of how big this industry is and how big this industry is getting, these are pretty significant numbers. So I'm going to just illustrate that for you on this slide. 2014, this is how the growth has occurred, between the last 2 years and the next 3 years. But now let's put what that 3% actually is. That's $138 million of loss, internal loss. 171 in 2015, 213 million in 2016. And if the calculus isn't corrected, if we're not doing our due diligence or implementing best practices when it comes to asset security or deterrent and prevention, we're looking at a $660 million cost to the business just because of security. Any thoughts on this so far? Yes, sir.
How does that compare to other industries as a percentage of revenue?
It's not astronomically high, so it's not like significantly higher than other industries. But what's interesting about this industry is it's underreported because this is largely a cash industry. And so it makes actual detection very difficult. And so when you're looking at the actual data from this is reported. They estimate that this number is 3 times higher when you think about unreported stuff because, how do you keep track of cash, essentially? I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the, sort of cash software systems that are out there and available for all of you, and I encourage you to do some research on it.
Hey Manny, sorry to cut off. And I mean, maybe not all the time, but I think this is pretty fair. We're going to take some questions at the end, so maybe write them down. But why don't you ask your question if you want? Just keep.
I was actually wondering how the projection got up to 22 billion by 2020. Like, what factored into the exponential growth on that?
These are so I didn't do a lot of research in understanding what's driving the growth, but assume it's positive legislation. It's more states, coming on board and licensing recreational. Medicinal cannabis, as well as states starting to license recreational. So I think it has to do with positive legislation for the industry. So if you're running a moderately sized dispensary, did you have a question, sir?
Yeah, real quick. The theft, is it mostly in the dispensaries, or was it also in the support businesses like cultivation?
Yeah, it's an end-to-end issue.
Is it equal in both?
I don't have that statistic. Okay. Right, so if you're running a moderately sized business, I just threw a $5 million business on it. That's about $150,000 a year. So what kind of best practices as an industry do we need to employ? Well, there are 12 prevention strategies that I've identified, and I'm sure there are more. And I'm, be interested in sort of if you guys have started to do any of this yourself. So where do you keep product? Where do you keep assets? We're encouraging customers that ask us, or prospective clients that ask us, is there needs to be some kind of a vaulting system. Even if you have safes on premise where you might keep cash or things like that, those safes need to go into very large vaults as well. And in-ground vaults is what we've been recommending. Biometric locks. Biometric locks actually allow you to limit access to just sort of trusted employees. It's also leverages technology which allows you to log access to certain secure areas. Cash tracking software we talked a little bit about. There's a few of them out there. I encourage you just to sort of Google it. There are some that are specialized for within the cannabis industry. And they're starting to get enough critical mass with these types of technologies that there are a lot of people providing reviews on it as well. So some of your colleagues have started to use this and they're providing some interesting feedback. Secure asset transportation. Some owners prefer armored transportation. That's pretty conspicuous. It's kind of like a celebrity walking into a club with 4 or 5 bodyguards around them. That's going to attract attention, I think, as far as detract from attention. So we advise our customers, we advise them for less conspicuous transportation. We prefer SUVs. They absorb a little bit more damage. They can go off-road. And our policy is if you're transporting assets that are valued at less than $1 million, you have 2 armed guards, they're radioed, and they're also being tracked by GPS technology. And then if it's greater than $1 million, we recommend a chase vehicle with an armed guard with the same, radioed and GPS technology. There's actually some newer technologies we're demonstrating in our booth, 1031, I think, where if you do have an on-premise physical guard, they can actually use their smartphone or their mobile device as an additional camera. So imagine you have a command room, or maybe you're hiring a company to watch your cameras remotely. They can activate their smartphone and start broadcasting to that command center in one of those little windows, like the 3x3 windows you see where security guards are watching activity. We're starting to investigate for the asset transportation, whether it makes sense to have them have an active smartphone with video as they're broadcasting or as they're transporting with a live feedback to a command center as well. Power generators, if someone's going to rob you, they're probably going to give them your security surveillance, and they're going to take anything you might be using to record the device, so it's good to have redundant systems to support infrastructure. Video audio surveillance, I talked about a little bit. Basic CCTV, I think, as you guys know, is pretty much table stakes. It's a requirement. But I think there's a lot of more advanced recommended services out there for you to consider. Related to that is just cloud storage and monitoring. You can also do secure door access remotely as well. Someone puts up their card, says let me in the building. Someone remotely can make sure that this is a person authorized and can activate the door remotely. I think when you do remote monitoring, it gives you some it's a cost-effective business model because it's leveraging both physical on-premise as well as technology. Remote monitoring, I chatted a little bit about, and then of course there's the on-site deterrent forces, and so this is typically uniformed, preferably armed, and just sort of having a presence like that could also serve as a deterrent. But last but not least, Anna talked about this, so I'll just sort of gloss over this. You need to really have a strong hiring practices in place as well as employee performance management practices in place. So you want to retain the employees that are going to be great and add value to your business. And then those that aren't, those that could potentially become a threat to your business, you want to have policies in place that get them out as quickly as you can. So thank you for your time, and yes, sir?
In regard to the armed personnel for security, how do you manage that? Because it's a separate business entity from the actual dispensary where you're not in violation of federal law? Because that's not having firearms on the premises is a big harsh federal violation. So how do you get around that?
Manny, if you want, this might be a good place for me to
Yeah, let's segue into our legal expert on the panel.
Manny, nice job.